Okay, now we are moving on to part 2 of project 2. So the last time we did part 1, here's my algorithm. You really should have an algorithmic design document done first, which is what I have done before I started coding. So if you look here, we did part 1, the struct, we did a default constructor, we did constructor with parameters. So if you look here, let's keep both of them side by side. So I go to my folder here, LO star, struct star. And if you look at my project2.cpp, which is my part 1 really, I should rename it. But if you look here, so there is a struct, there are my constructors, constructor, default constructor, constructor with parameters. I did all that. I implemented, that's the same as the implementation. I have the load data and the print data function written. And if we go down and see, there's my load data. I load from the file. Now in this, I'm not having an open file function. I do that in main. I open the file. I return 0 if there's an error. If not, I call load data. And what we do here in main is I create a list of this struct type, right? So I create a struct outside main. Notice the struct is outside of main because this is a data type. We want all functions to be able to use that. So the struct is outside the main. And then inside of the main, which is my client code, I create an array of the videos, array of the struct, right? I need more than one video. I need a list of videos. Then I create my local other variables, file stream variable, count to count the number of videos I'm loading from the file, the number of videos. As we add from the user, that's going to keep track of the number of videos in my list. Okay. And I have a couple of constants. We talked about all of these things, right, in part 1. So this is part 1. Now, going on to part 2, we are going to do the menu functions in part 2. This doesn't have any menu functions. So if you notice, all this will do is load from the file and print it. That's all this is doing. It's not doing anything more, okay? So what I want in this part is to do menu functions and break it down into execute command, which we don't have in our previous part, project 1. We put it all in main. As far as the switch goes, the switch was all done in main. Okay, now we're going to do the switch in a different function. That's it. We're just going to take it and put it into a different function. Other than that, all of these functions you already have. So you should be able to copy it from your project 1. This is the only new function that we have. And we are going to write a couple of new functions. Okay, so I've already done some of this. Let's take a look at what I have and then we'll write more code. So on this left-hand side window, I'm going to go back into my folder structs. And in here, I have a project2 part 2. So if we go project2 part2.cpp, and if we go right in the beginning, there's the same thing continuing from project 1, but the difference is, let me switch these windows around so I can use this to talk about project part 2. Okay, so here we go. Part 2 says, okay, wrong window, other window. Okay, part 2 says we are going to have a display menu function. So let's go down, find all my prototypes. So here are my prototypes. I have database functions, which we had from part 1, and utilities, which is what I'm adding here. It's an open file function, which opens the file. Again, you had this in part 1. You should copy it. Display menu, you had this in project 1. Read option, you had this in project 1. This is the new function that I added, execute command. So notice my main doesn't have all the switch that you had. My main does everything that you had in project 1. Open file, calls the open file function, checks to see if it doesn't open, we return it. Then we call load data, which we did in part 1. Load data reads from the file, loads the data, prints it just to show us what it has. Then it displays the menu. This is new for part 2. I call the display menu function. I call the read option function. Then I have an execute command. So I took all that switch that you had in main and threw it into an execute command. Now the thing about execute command is if you go up and look at the prototype, it should take the option, it should take the array, one array only, because now we have an array of records. You don't need to pass 3 and 4 parallel arrays. One array. Each element in the array is a whole record. It should have your song name, artist, duration in minutes and seconds, everything. Just like my struct has title and year. right? So you're passing only one array and count by reference, okay? So if you go down, again, these are all similar functions, nothing different. The open file function is exactly the same as what you had before. The menu is exactly the same. The read option is exactly the same. Execute command is the one that I added. Make sure you update all your comments for the functions. Execute command takes this char option that is read by read option, takes the array and the count by reference. The array, remember, comes in by reference anyway, and all I have is here the switch. Okay, the switch does exactly what it did before. Based on the letter that the user enters, it calls the different functions, and I have commented everything out except for my print data for right now. And load data was already there in part 1, loads from the file. Print data was already there in part 1, it prints it, right? That's it. That's all I have. Okay, now if we build this and run it, I already have it built, let's run it. It's called Project2, Part 2. You will see that it just loads from the file, and here's the menu. Okay, the menu says pick an option. If I say A, it won't do anything. If I say P, though, it'll print everything. Okay, all right, now here are a couple of more things I need to do in part 2. So I'm here in my document. I need to do the add video function for part 2, and I need to do the readInt function. I'll show you what the readInt function is for. Let's first do the add video function. So let's go back here on the right side, edit my code. And on the left side, remember, I already have that add video function. I am going to go to my old Project1. You should also get this from your Project1. I am going to go to my video list, video part 4, or either one of them should have it. Video part 4.cpp, and go to line 1 and get my prototype first. Here's my prototype that says add video. I'm going to change it. I have to change a few things, and so should you. If you go to line 1 here, let's add it with my database functions right here. After my print function, I'm going to come here, insert. Okay, and I'm going to put it here. And what I need to change is I don't have any char arrays anymore. Okay, these two arrays are going to be gone. Remember, we have one array, and this array is the same that I have on the previous line, but no const, this array. Okay, so that's the array that I need to send to my add video. Don't need multiple arrays, one array. Okay, then I'm going to take that line and we're going to write the function for that. Again, we can copy and paste from my other function. So let's go down all the way to the bottom of the code and append, and here we go. Insert it here. Now let's go here and copy code from my add video where I already do everything. All I have to do is figure out how I'm going to, what array I'm going to insert it into. So let's copy the comments first. I'd like to copy my comments. I come here and I go here and I put my comments. And then here, let's take this code and then we'll change it. You got to change it because as it is, it won't work. Okay, because we don't have those 4 arrays anymore. So let's start by changing the comments. Add video adds a video item to the struct array, one array. That's important. Okay, checks to see if count is within cap, adds the video to the end of the list. I actually should do that. I'm not doing that. Takes the list, which is just one list, okay, which is the struct array. That's what that is, one array, and its size returns nothing since count comes in as a reference. So it's returning nothing. Okay, please enter the name of the movie. Now, where do we read it into? So here is where you need to change it. It would be list square bracket count dot title, right? Because if you go up and look at my struct title is what I have. So title is the name of my char array that I'm reading it into. So if we go all the way back to the bottom of my function, we want to read it into that data member. Okay, so list square bracket count dot title, and same thing here. insert. We don't want to do video year, list square bracket count, because list is the array coming in dot year, right? That's the name of the data member that I have in my struct, and count plus plus. That's it. Nothing needs to change other than that. Now, ideally, I should come here and check. Before I add, I should check to see if count less than cap, then we should add. If count is not less than cap, I should not add. So it's add only if count is less than cap. If it is not, it will simply go back. One added. Okay, so there is my add video function. Anything else? That's all there is. Now let's test it by going up and calling here, uncomment this line, and that will call my function. And let's write it. Let's go on this side. Okay, quit out of there. And let's go to my struct folder. Let's compile it. Project2, Part2. And there is some curly bracket that I forgot to close somewhere on line 183. So go here to line 183, and I must have, oh, there's a semicolon at the end of the line, which is no good. Delete it. Okay, let's try this one more time. On the left hand side, there we go. Then you run it, Project2, Part2. Okay, so it outputs everything I want to add. So let's add a new movie called, what do we want to call it? Wonder Woman. And then some here. Handprint. And there we go. Now we have the new movie added. And I don't have a search function written yet, but that's it. That's all I want to do. And you can keep adding movies and it will add to it. Okay. All right, that's done. Now one more before we are done. My algorithm says I want to be able to do read int to validate integers. Okay, so real quick, let's try and do that. What are we talking about? Read int says here, if you run your program, for example, and let's say I want to add a video and I can just call it new movie. But here, if you type in a letter, and that's a bad thing, an infinite loop. Okay, so we want to catch that error. What I did was I typed in some characters for a number, and that's not good. So we want to write a function that will catch errors. And so that's the readInt function. What this function is going to do is it's going to validate any number that we are trying to read from the user. So first I'm going to write my prototype. My prototype is going to go under the utilities function because it is a function to do some utility function here. So int read int, it's going to read a number and it is going to return the number if the number is good. If the number is bad, then it will simply not return the number. It will stay in there. Now this is going to take a char array. Okay, it's going to take a char array called prompt. And this prompt is the one that's going to get output. So let's go down and write that function with the rest of my utilities function. Before I do my database function right here, let's go say this function is going to, I'm going to copy this menu or this function comments and put it in here, and it's going to say int read int, and we are going to have a prompt that's going to come in from main, and the function is going to see out the prompt. That's all that does. Okay, prompt will say what do you want to do, output, enter a number or something like that. Then we're going to read it into, I have to have a temp variable created. This temp is going to be an int temp variable that we're going to read into. And here's what we do. While, remember this, we've done this before, while not seen, that means if the user entered a bad data type, which would be a character for a number, then you're going to do cin.clear, which resets cin.ignore, which gets rid of stuff from the buffer until the new line character that they enter. And then we go and output an error message saying invalid data, please try again, try again. So the ignore simply says get rid of everything from the buffer with an end line. And then we read again. That's very important. Read into that temp variable again. So all that goes in the while loop. When we come out of the while loop, what we do, when do we come out of the while loop? When the data is good. Then we return temp. Okay. So that's all that goes in there. It simply validates data by doing while, not cin. And one other thing that we should do, oops, when we come out of there before we return is ignore, read the number. If there's anything else in the buffer, we should ignore it as well. Okay, it's just a new line. Okay, so let's change our comments here and then use the function. So this will read int function to validate integers. So you write one function and call it both times whenever you want to read your minute and when you want to try this again, when you want to read your seconds, both times. Okay, so validates an integer from the input. Okay, and then so what does this take as a parameter? It takes a char array, which is the prompt. It takes the prompt as a char array, returns an integer. It does return something. Okay, returns a good integer, I should say. Okay, now let's go and call this function. Where would I call this function? Whenever you're reading a number, you should call this function. So where am I reading a number? In add video. Here, instead of saying cout, please enter the year of the movie, you would call your function called, you would say list square bracket count dot year equals read int and your prompt. Okay, and then I don't need this line. So what we're doing here is you call the function, you send the prompt, because that's what is going into my readInt function in the parenthesis. Notice I'm receiving it into my char array. Okay, and so in fact what I might have to do here is I might have to, it might not like this. So let's copy, let's have char prompt max car. Let's create a char array. And before you call the function, let's do this. Let's string copy prompt, comma, this whole thing. Let's copy this there. So that way we are actually putting it into a variable. And here we call readInt and send prompt to it. So because the char array doesn't like to take a literal string like that. It will not like that inside the parenthesis, inside the function parameter. So what we do is we have a variable called prompt. We copy this prompt, which is a text. So you would call your readInt function, you would copy the prompt that says, please enter the duration in minutes. And then you call this function readInt and send prompt. And whatever comes back, put it into minutes. Then you'd call the same function again. You string copy, please enter the number of seconds into the prompt, and you call the same function again, readInt, and this time whatever number it reads will be for the seconds, and when it comes back you put it into your seconds, right? Whenever you want to call a number, you call that function. That's all it is. Or whenever you want to read a number, you call that function. Okay, so now let's try that and see if our data validation works. So first compile it, then run it, and say I want to add a video, new movie, and if I type in something like that, it says, hey, invalid data, please try again. As long as I keep typing bad data, it's going to give me an error message until I enter good data. So now notice I have new movie with 2019. It didn't take any of my bad data, and then I can quit. Okay, so it's important to do data validation.